Hey everyone. Have you ever thought about what it would be like to have like really fast internet in India, without any of that lag we sometimes deal with?
It's an interesting thought, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially when we think about how much we rely on the internet these days for, work, entertainment, staying connected.
Absolutely. And what's exciting is that Elon Musk and Starlink are aiming to make that a reality. And I think it's worth taking a deep dive into what that could actually mean for, people in India and how it could change things.
Yeah, it's not just about like making things a little bit faster.
Right.
It's really about potentially changing the whole way we think about and access the internet.
Totally. A fundamental shift. So, in this deep dive, we're going to break down what Starlink is all about and maybe even more importantly, how it's different from the, mobile internet and the wired internet that we're all kind of used to in India.
Exactly.
Consider this like your crash course on Starlink.
Your fast track.
Yeah, to figuring out how this tech could totally reshape your experience online.
Yeah. And just to give you a bit of a roadmap of where we're heading, we'll be zeroing in on 5 key areas. First, we'll get super clear on what Starlink actually is and what makes it different, compared to what you're using now.
Okay.
Then we'll dig into the nitty-gritty of how this Starlink tech works, like how does it actually function?
The magic behind it all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then we'll compare Starlink head-to-head with the current systems here in India. Highlight the differences you'd actually notice as a user.
And the million-dollar question, of course, is always cost. So we'll look at how Starlink is priced in the US kind of as a benchmark and what the experts are predicting for India.
Right. And to wrap things up, we'll cover the equipment side of things, what you would actually need to get up and running with Starlink.
Perfect.
So by the end of this, we want you to walk away with a really solid grasp of Starlink, what it means, and how it could potentially change things without getting lost in all the, super technical jargon.
Awesome. So let's jump right in. Let's unpack what Starlink is at its core. What is this thing and how is it different from like the typical ways we get online in India now?
All right, so the fundamental difference really comes down to where the satellites are, the ones beaming down the internet.
Okay.
So traditional satellite internet, the kind you might already be familiar with, uses these things called geostationary satellites.
Yeah.
They orbit the Earth way out there at about 36,000 kilometers.
Whoa. Okay. That's far.
Yeah, it's a long way.
That's high up.
But here's where Starlink gets interesting. They use a whole bunch of low Earth orbit satellites, or LEO satellites,
Right.
and these are positioned much closer to Earth, like around 550 kilometers.
Oh, wow. So that's a massive difference in distance, like the height.
Huge, yeah.
So what does that mean practically having these satellites much closer? Like how does that impact the experience?
The biggest impact, and this is really noticeable, is on latency. So, when you click a link or you hit send on an email, there's that slight delay
Right.
before anything happens online, right?
Yeah.
That's latency.
Yeah.
Yeah, with those far-out geostationary satellites, that round trip for the data can take about 240 milliseconds. That's almost a quarter of a second. Okay. But Starlink, because it's closer, that delay is slashed down to about 20 milliseconds.
20 milliseconds. So that's like super fast, like almost instantaneous
Pretty much, yeah.
compared to what I think a lot of people in India experience anyway.
Yeah.
So what does that mean for you, like day to day? How does that make things better?
Well, think about it. If you're a gamer and every millisecond counts, that lag you might experience would practically vanish.
Oh, yeah.
Video calls would be much smoother, more natural.
Right.
And then looking ahead, there's this whole world of AI applications. Many of them need really fast, low latency connections to work properly, real-time data processing and all that.
Oh, I see.
And Starlink is designed to be that backbone.
So it's built for the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how does this Starlink system actually like beam into your house? Like what kind of hardware do you need? What are we talking about here?
So on your end, you typically have an antenna. It looks kind of like a small satellite dish.
Okay.
And then you have a power cable to plug it in a Wi-Fi router because you want to spread that internet signal around your house.
Right.
And a base to mount the antenna, securely.
Okay, and that antenna connects directly to the satellites, right? It's not going through like cell towers or all the cables underground.
Exactly. It bypasses all of that.
Yeah.
It's a direct link with that network of low Earth orbit satellites up above.
Interesting. And what about weather? Does the weather affect it?
That's a good question.
Because India has a lot of different kinds of weather, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's designed to be pretty resilient, even in rain and snow. Heavy downpours can sometimes mess with satellite signals,
Sure.
but Starlink is built to maintain a stable connection.
That's good to hear, especially for people in India, with all the monsoons and everything.
Yeah, for sure. But even beyond that, what's really exciting about Starlink is the potential to bring the internet to places that have never really had it before. Underserved areas.
Yeah. The video mentioned that A lot. That seems to be like one of the biggest selling points.
For sure, because it doesn't need all those ground-based towers and cables.
Right.
It can reach remote communities, isolated villages, mountainous regions, places where it's just too difficult or too expensive to build that traditional infrastructure.
So like bringing the internet to the Himalayas.
Exactly. And for a lot of these communities, this would be their first real access to the digital world.
That's pretty amazing. So to be clear, the data goes from a satellite hundreds of kilometers above right down to that dish on someone's roof and then straight to their devices inside their home.
That's it. The antenna picks up the signal from the satellite, feeds it to the router, and then the router creates a Wi-Fi network so all your devices can connect.
So it's kind of simple in a way once it's set up.
Yeah, it is. It's pretty straightforward.
So we talked about low Earth orbit and this direct satellite connection, but how does it actually stack up against, the internet options that most people in India are using right now? Like, what are the main differences?
Okay, let's break it down. So we've already talked about the huge difference in latency compared to those traditional satellite internet systems, right, with the geostationary satellites.
Right, far away.
Yeah, way out there. But we also need to compare it to other popular internet technologies in India, like air fiber. The video mentioned
Yeah,
that.
air fiber. Yeah, what's the difference there?
So air fiber is this wireless broadband tech that connects your house to a nearby telecom tower using radio waves.
Okay, so it's still going through a tower.
Yeah, it's wireless for that last leg to your house,
Right.
but it still needs that network of towers on the ground. Starlink cuts out all of that completely by talking directly to those satellites way up above.
I see. And what about the good old wired broadband, the cable internet that a lot of people in cities and towns have? Is that comparable at all?
Wired broadband, whether it's fiber optic or the older copper cables, it's definitely reliable in areas where they have that infrastructure. But it can be a huge and expensive project to lay down all those cables, especially in areas where there aren't a lot of people or the geography is challenging, mountains and things like that.
Makes sense.
Starlink's advantage is that all you need is a clear view of the sky for your antenna. No digging up roads, no laying down miles of cable.
Okay, so that's a big plus for a lot of areas in India, I'm guessing.
Definitely. And then there's the sheer number of Starlink satellites, the video mentioned, over 7,000 up there, which is kind of mind-blowing.
That's a lot of satellites.
It is. And that's what allows them to provide coverage almost everywhere. Having that many satellites means there's always a few within range to connect to, so you get a more consistent and reliable connection, even in those remote parts of India that struggle with internet access now.
So the more the better in that case.
For coverage, yeah, definitely.
The video also hinted at using Starlink on the go, like in cars, boats, even planes. Is that really a thing? How does that even work?
You need specific hardware built for those mobile environments. But the idea is the same. It's all about that direct communication with the satellites.
So as long as you can see the sky, you're good to go.
Pretty much. Whether you're sailing across the ocean or flying high up there, if your equipment has a clear line of sight to the sky, it can connect to Starlink.
That's really interesting. And the difference in latency that they mentioned was pretty amazing, too. I think they said Starlink has a latency of like 25 to 60 milliseconds compared to 600 or more for the systems that most people are using now.
That's right. And that's a night and day difference in terms of responsiveness. It makes everything feel smoother and faster, whether you're browsing the web gaming, video chatting, whatever you're doing online.
So that's like super noticeable then.
Oh, yeah. It's a game changer.
Now, for the question everyone's probably wondering about cost and when Starlink might actually become widely available across India, the video gave some interesting examples from other countries that have already started using it.
Yeah, they do. Bhutan was the first in South Asia to adopt Starlink. Their basic plan, which they call the light plan, offers speeds between 23 and over 100 megabits per second, and it costs about 3,000 Bhutanese gultram per month.
And that's roughly the same as Indian rupees, right?
Yeah, pretty much 1-to-1. So that gives us a possible idea of the pricing we might see in India.
Okay.
And they also have a faster plan with speeds of 110 plus Mbps that costs about 4,200 in gultram.
So those prices seem potentially competitive, especially for people in cities and towns, I guess.
It's possible. Yeah, no, for the Indian market specifically, the experts interviewed in the video predicted that the basic Starlink plan could cost somewhere between 3,500 and 4,500 per month.
Okay, so that's a bit more expensive, but still within reach for a lot of people. And there's also the partnership with Jio, right? How might that affect things?
Yeah, that's a big deal. The video said that Jio stores are going to be selling Starlink hardware.
Okay.
So that could lead to some interesting deals, maybe bundles or financing options to make Starlink more affordable.
Right.
And Jio has stores all over India.
They do. They're everywhere.
So that could really help with getting Starlink into people's hands quickly.
It's pretty crazy to think that the video said something like 40% of people in India still don't have internet
That's
access.
a huge number.
Yeah, that's a lot of potential customers for Starlink, especially in those remote areas we were talking about.
Absolutely. And there's a precedent for Starlink adjusting prices based on the market.
Really?
Yeah, the video mentioned that they lowered prices in Kenya and South Africa after launching there.
Interesting.
So it's possible we could see something similar in India as more competition comes in.
So it could actually end up being cheaper than those initial estimates.
Maybe, yeah. But one thing to keep in mind is the upfront investment for Starlink, building and launching all those satellites.
Right.
That's got to be way more expensive than building towers and laying cables on the ground.
That makes sense. You have to factor in all those costs.
Yeah, definitely. The video also mentioned that Starlink has been used in Ukraine during the conflict there.
Oh, right.
They reported speeds of 25 to 220 millipedes for downloads, 5 to 20 millipedes for uploads, and latency of 25 to 50 milliseconds.
So it actually works pretty well even in a war zone.
Yeah, seems like it can handle some tough conditions. And just for comparison, the video mentioned that the standard Starlink plan in the U.S. costs around $10,500 per month.
Okay.
And they have a portable plan, which is about $15,000 per month. And then there's the business plans. Those start at $43,000 per month and go up from there, depending on what the business needs.
So that gives us an idea of the pricing in a more established market.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, if someone in India decides they want to go for it and get Starlink, how much would they have to spend up front for the equipment?
So the video estimated that the initial cost for the hardware and installation could be between $25,000 and $35,000 in India.
Okay.
And just to compare that to regular broadband, the video said that costs around $700 to $1,500 per month. So it's definitely a bigger investment up front.
Yeah, it's a chunk of change.
It is, but for people in areas with no other good internet options, it might be worth it.
For sure. So beyond just, downloading things faster and having smoother streaming,
Right.
what are the bigger implications of having satellite internet like Starlink become widely available in India?
I think it has the potential to really change things in a lot of areas, like education, healthcare, agriculture, disaster response, you name it.
Oh, wow. In what ways?
Well, for education, it could give students in remote schools access to all sorts of online learning resources.
Right.
In healthcare, it could enable telemedicine and remote diagnostics for people in underserved areas.
That's huge.
Yeah, and in agriculture, it could help farmers with things like precision farming techniques and connecting them to markets. And in disaster situations when regular communication networks go down, satellite internet could be a lifeline.
So it's not just about convenience, it's about connecting people in ways that were never possible before.
Exactly. And think about all those remote villages, the Himalayas island territories that have always been digitally isolated. This could really open things up for them.
It's pretty inspiring to think about all the possibilities, but the video did mention some potential downsides too, especially when it comes to the environment.
Yeah, there are some legitimate concerns about having so many satellites up there in low Earth orbit. The video talked about the possibility of aluminum oxide being released when old satellites re-enter the atmosphere, and some research suggests that could affect the ozone layer.
Oh, right.
So as these satellite constellations grow, doing research and finding ways to make them more sustainable is really important.
Absolutely. And what about regulations? I know India has a lot of rules about the telecom industry and space. Isn't that going to be a challenge for Starlink?
Yeah, the video highlighted a few key hurdles that Starlink will probably have to clear in India. Things like getting telecom licenses, adhering to space regulations, obtaining security clearances, complying with data storage laws, and getting permission to land their equipment.
So it's not just a matter of launching the satellites. There's a lot of red tape to deal with.
Definitely navigating that regulatory landscape is going to be crucial for Starlink's long-term success in India.
And it's not just Starlink, right? The video mentioned that Amazon is working on Project Kuiper, and even SpaceX has its own Starshield project.
Yeah, the satellite internet field is getting crowded.
Yeah.
Amazon's Project Kuiper wants to launch a huge number of internet satellites. And then there's Starshield, which seems to have a different focus. But it's all pointing to a growing global interest in this technology.
So it's a competitive space.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's interesting to see where Starlink is currently operating. The video said they're in about 125 markets now, including North and South America, Australia, parts of Europe, and Bhutan was the first in South Asia.
Right. And it's also worth noting that big players like China and Russia haven't adopted Starlink. They're developing their own satellite internet networks instead.
So they want to be self-reliant in that area.
Yeah, it seems like they see it as strategically important.
So to wrap things up, what are the key takeaways for our listeners about Starlink's potential entry into India?
Well, I think the most exciting part is the potential to bring high-speed, low-latency internet to parts of India that have struggled to get connected using traditional methods.
Right, like those remote areas we talked about?
Exactly.
Mm.
It could really open up opportunities in so many different areas.
But it's important to weigh the costs and the environmental impact as well, right?
Definitely. You have to consider the initial cost, the monthly fees, and the potential impact of all those satellites on the environment.
And the regulatory hurdles too.
Oh, for sure. Navigating all those rules and regulations is a big part of the picture.
So for our listeners, if you're in an area with bad internet or you need really low latency for the things you do online, Starlink could be a game changer.
It could be, yeah.
Huh.
But do your research think about the costs and keep up with how the technology is developing?
Absolutely. And here's something to think about as we wrap up. We've talked about all the amazing things satellite internet can do, like connecting people who've never had access before.
Right.
But the video also made a good point about the potential environmental costs of all these satellites.
It's a valid concern.
So as we embrace this new technology and all the connectivity it promises, what are your thoughts on balancing those benefits with the potential impact on the environment? It's a tough question, but it's worth thinking about.
Yeah, it's something we all need to consider as this technology evolves.